that when we think about a rule of law, we talk about a rule of just behavior that says, if you make a promise, you should keep it. If you drive on the road, you must drive on the right side or the left side. For any country, it doesn't really matter, as long as everyone drives on the same side. Right? In Malaysia, you drive on the left side. That's fine with me. In the United States, you drive on the right side. If you come to the United States, drive on the right side. We have a rule for everybody, but it doesn't mean that some people are exempted. That if you have a red flash on your car that says you're the son of the president, you get to drive on the other side of the road. North Korea has that. In the North Korean roads, there's always 3 lanes. This way, and the middle way is for the maximum leader. Who's the only one who can drive on that. Special lane on every road for the maximum leader. It's a psychopath. Right? But that's a system in which we don't have equal rule for everybody. There's a tradition, a pre-liberal tradition called physiocracy. The physiocrats were early economists. What physiocracy meant was, from the Greek word physis, which means nature. From this we get physics and physician come from this. They deal with nature. Physics studies nature, how bodies attract each other when things fall and so on. And physicians help your body to heal itself because they understand the nature of your body and what you need for good health. Physiocracy meant we'll let the rule of nature. The reason is that there are certain orderly processes in human life that we observe. For instance, if you want to have a prosperous society, you need food and to sell them freely in the market at the price that is determined by supply and demand. That will generate food and prosperity. If you want to starve people to death and cause them to eat each other, eliminate property rights. What are the 2 greatest experiences of cannibalism in all of human history? That people eat other people? Soviet Union, Communist China in the 20th century. When they collectivized agriculture, the starvation was horrifying. In Ukraine, they eliminated about 1/3 of the population, starved to death. And when people are starving, they go crazy. And they did awful things. Now, you might say, maybe it could be otherwise. Well, no, that's not how human beings are. We have a nature. So we understand we need certain rules to generate certain outcomes. That's the rule of law. That you can't have a king who says, no, I'll abolish property rights, but it will be okay. It doesn't work. You might say, how many times do you have to keep trying it until people realize it doesn't work? So that's what I mean by rule of law. But in particular, we might say the following. We have a rule of law that is not regard to who you are. The law does not have your name in it. If there's a law with the name of a person in it, that's not a law. That's a command or a privilege. It's not a law. It is always applied by human beings, judges, attorneys, citizens, of course. But the law should be the law, the same for all of us. And that's the idea of rule of law. And it's based on fundamental principles of human sociality, of how human beings live together. Isn't the market also a form of a state? Could someone explain what that means? That's an interesting, puzzling question. Yes.
My idea is that, from what organization, my understanding is that the liberal movement is a reaction against the state, but
against the absolute state.
The absolute state. But for me, I think what is in common between these two is the maybe trade, which becomes the basis because maybe during in Britain, if I'm correct, please correct me if I'm wrong. Even though the revolution is against the state, but it was replaced by an elite class, a new class. And I think this, for instance, an example is like the East India Company. So although the state does not come and colonize per se, the state colonizes another land through sense.
Oh, I see your point. Then I would rephrase this. I think this is a mistake to put the market is not a form of a state. States can utilize the market and intervene in the market in various ways, right? If you take about the following case, the George Bush and his government invaded Iraq. They hired a lot of private contractors in doing it also, who provide water and food to the troops. In a way, they go to the market. But this is not a market phenomenon. What they've done is they steal money from taxpayers, right? Force themselves into a foreign country where they weren't welcome, and will set aside Saddam Hussein was a bad person. But that does not justify invading Iraq, in my opinion. But they invaded this country. It's true that they go to the market to buy goods and services, right? When they buy coffee for the soldiers, they don't come in at gunpoint and say, give us coffee. They go to the market and they buy coffee and deliver it to the troops. They might also contract out, which is effectively what the East India Company was done. It was the state contracting out its colonialism, if you will, and people got a lot of money from doing that. But that's not a market. A market is when people come and voluntarily buy and sell. Right? Not when you come in with an army, conquer it, and say, okay, now your job is to work in our rubber plantations. What European imperialism did, and let's be fair, there's other countries that had imperialism too. There's been Chinese imperialism and Russian imperialism, imperialism in Africa. But what the Europeans did, when they colonized, for instance, parts of Asia and Africa, they came in and they said, you have to pay taxes, because the fundamental mentality was human being is a taxpayer. So you have to pay taxes. How do you get taxes? With the money to pay the taxes? Because you could only pay in Western currency. Belgian francs, for example. The only way to get that is by working in the mines and the plantations owned by the colonial masters. Nice deal, right? So you force people to work in order to get the money to pay the taxes that they have to pay for the so-called privilege of being colonized. This is not a free market phenomenon. This is a state activity. It's a kind of a state-run corporation, if you will, but absolutely the opposite of a free trade philosophy. And the liberals were unwavering critics of imperialism. And one of the things that they did that was very intelligent, remember I talked about individualism? The liberals said, in the case of England, imperialism is bad for England. And they said, well, how can that be? England was colonizing the world. They said, the British ruling class was colonizing the world. But the English pay the taxes and send their sons to die. Lenin said imperialism was good for imperialistic countries. No one ever said Lenin was a good economist. He wasn't. There's one of the best books ever written on this by Davis and Huttenbach called Mammon and the Pursuit of Empire. Shows, I think quite conclusively, the liberals were right. That the net cost of the empire was much higher than the net benefit in terms of the taxes to support the imperial armies and all of the expenses and the soldiers. The reason why the empire persisted was the people who paid the cost and the people who got the benefit are two different groups of people. Taxpayers paid the cost, but the imperial administrators in the East India Company got the benefit. Who was it that had the bigger impact? Remember I talked about diffused costs and concentrated benefits. The East India Company got the concentrated benefits, but the British taxpayers paid the cost. If you add up the two, the costs are much higher than the benefits. But for political reasons, the state persisted in this. As an aggregate, the English were poorer, but some English were much richer than others. They benefited, but the vast majority of the population paid the price. That's common for lots and lots of such behavior. You want to look at the beneficiaries and the payers of the cost may be two different groups of people. You might end up with a benefit of 10 and a cost of 30. On net, you're minus 20. But if the 10 are the ones who make the decisions, that's what the state will do. Even though the bulk of the population pays 30. So as an aggregate, they're worse off. But the decision makers are ahead by 10. Right? They gain from it. That's the way to think about these things.